Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 289. How often do you ask other people for feedback? Do you even know how to ask for it? Be honest. Our guest this week, Dale McKay, has some feedback for you in this episode. Today, Dale is a VMware consultant focusing on federal customers, and he's an experienced mentor to many people, including me. If you missed part 1 of our discussion with Dale in episode 288, we spoke about Dale's early career in the Navy and his study of advanced electronics. We talked about his transition to civilian life, and then we defined the roles of a mentor and a mentee. This week in part 2 of our discussion, you'll get to hear a little bit about Dale's experience as a classroom instructor and a consultant, and certainly we'll weave in a theme of mentoring. Let's see if you're able to pinpoint why Dale enjoys mentoring others throughout this discussion. We talk about why you need to enhance your personal brand throughout your career, and the importance of asking for and receiving feedback, and how to process it. Let's get right to it. Here we go with part 2 of our discussion with Dale McKay.
I know that in the military, there's a lot of training. There's a school for this, a school for that, and school for the other. And you come out into the civilian world and you go into industry. A lot of organizations do not have like formal training or a, quote unquote school for XYZ. Do you think that that gap is where some of this interest in mentorship came for you?
I'm actually glad you said that, John, because I do believe that. And I do believe that's probably where some of my interest came from, because one of the companies I worked for in my career was AT&T, and I was fortunate enough to work for AT&T when they had a corporate training campus where they would send you to different training, some of it technical, some of it more soft skill type training. But this was all conducted by trainers who were AT&T employees, and they were very good at what they did. I don't know of a single large organization, maybe IBM, that still has that concept today, where you would be given weeks off to go and attend a 4-week or 6-week course at these training campuses. I just don't know of any employer who does that. Maybe there is some, and I just don't know about them.
I remember hearing stories about GE's like management training, and it was almost like going to graduate school, it sounded like. And, it was pretty competitive to even, get into those trainings. It's interesting to kind of stumble across that. We've replaced all of that with computer-based training, watching videos, and I think that there's a gap there. There's definitely a gap there.
I think there is too. I mean, I spent some time as a corporate trainer for Dell. Now, this wasn't at a segregated campus. This was right at the Roundmont campus. Most of my classes were week-long classes, but there's an interaction that takes place inside the classroom in a face-to-face setting that you're never going to be able to replicate with computer training. You'll never be able to have the feel of being in that classroom and being able to have those side conversations. And I know that someone's going to say, well, we have a chat. We can chat while we're doing the training. just not quite the same. I mean, it comes close, but it's not quite the same. And you certainly can't replicate the social nature of what takes place in that classroom. Whether it's going to lunch, going to dinner, the banter that takes place sometimes.
The creation of a cohort, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That unit of group of people that comes together, coheres. Maybe there's different relationships and, some are tighter than others, but that unit that works together and learns together. That's a really interesting point of view. I mean, that's got to be true for, remote work versus in-office work too, now that I think about it.
Well, and it probably is. I mean, I've kind of always worked remote with the exception of, well, when I was a trainer, obviously I was in the classroom. And there are days that I feel like I miss some of that office camaraderie, particularly when I was at a customer recently where the entire team that I was working with was planning on going to the premiere of the new Deadpool movie. And that was like a big deal for them to make those plans where they were going to go to dinner, buying the tickets. And that was a big deal. And that showed at least some adhesion within that team. And I don't want to miscategorize it so that you think that there was some discontinuity beneath the surface, but whether you like all your teammates or not, if you can just go and sit through a movie with them, there's still a bonding that's going to take place. We don't have to necessarily like everybody that we work with, but we do have to work with them. So if you can do something with them that pulls both of you together, I think those are all good things. And that's what we used to have in the classroom is that, you would get some guys that maybe didn't like necessarily hanging out with each other, but they were there for the week. And everybody managed to somehow or another end up respecting everybody by the end of the week. And everybody would walk out of there feeling like it was a week well spent. Will we ever get back there? I don't know.
I think what I just heard is that a mentor has something to teach, perhaps not so different than the classroom instructor.
I think I still do that. John, a while ago you mentioned about a consultant role, how I can't go to a college somewhere and get a degree in consulting, because every role is different. And I think the beauty about being a consultant, I've been a consultant in a lot of different places, Dell, VMware, I think a TAM is kind of a consulting role at VMware, or at least it was as I did the role, that consulting is what you make of it. And if you want to be that consultant that teaches as part of that consulting role, then I think most customers embrace that. I had a very recent experience where I went into a customer and I said, well, do you really understand this? And it happened to be NSX that we were talking about. He goes, well, yeah, not really. Well, can I spend a half an hour just taking you through it? Sure. And at the end of that half an hour, he said, that's a conversation I've been waiting 6 months to have with somebody. And it was a teaching conversation. It's like, yeah, this is how this stuff works. This is what it's all about. And sometimes we get into a very transactional nature and we kind of forget that if we can just, again, work within that set of guardrails, that guy's probably going to wind up going to some NSX training class where they're going to have a lot more time, a lot nicer books, a lot nicer diagrams than what I did for him. But, it was what he needed in that moment to feel comfortable with what it was that we were going to try and do.
So I think it would be fair to say that a consultant is a gap filler. You're going somewhere to help solve a problem. You see the gaps and you fill them. Maybe it's through education. Maybe it's through doing something for someone, some sort of install, setup, architecture. But you're meeting the person you're helping wherever they are, just like the instructor would have to meet the learner wherever they are, just like the mentor would have to meet the mentee wherever they are.
I think that's a pretty common theme in my career, how I do business and what I kind of pride myself on. Whether it's, if you want to call it helpful, maybe we can call it helpful. I feel in every case, in every consulting case, people are paying money for you to help them with a problem. If you go in there and you make it a very transactional thing, okay, look, I installed this switch for you. Here it is. It's up and running. See you later. Bye. You've missed an opportunity for your company and for yourself to further both your company brand and your own brand. Stop for a minute and don't make it so transactional. Have a conversation about, well, what is it that you're trying to do? Oh, okay, I get it now. Let them educate you for a little bit so that you in turn can take that knowledge and help them be better. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what I think every consultant should have on their mind, is that lead the situation you came into better if it's at all possible.
That's so interesting because you're interpreting the role not just to, hey, here's a statement of work and I'm going to get this done, or something a little bit less formal, but almost like your job is to come in and be a catalyst for change within the organization. So you're looking to help them change wherever you go. Sometimes it's small change, sometimes it's, large change, but that goal to be a catalyst for change is a very interesting thing that I don't think that I had ever associated with the role, or maybe it's not on anybody's list of one of my skills is to be a catalyst for change, right?
Yeah.
It's not in the job description, but maybe it should be.
There's a lot of people who call themselves consultants, and some are really good and some are, quite honestly, like a lot of other things in life, just mediocre. If you want to excel in consulting, and like I said, I lump technical TAMs in with consulting because you're in front of the customer, then you have to be willing to go that extra mile and to really focus on having the customer feel like you're helping them be better. And again, whatever situation you're in, you want to leave it better than when you went into that situation.
I really like that. Does consultant mean that I'm automatically going to have to do a ton of traveling for the prospective person who thinks they want to be a consultant?
I don't think it does. I think there's some travel that has to be involved. I mean, I think that's, again, if you think about what goes on when you arrive on a customer's site, it's not just all about transaction. Like I had lunch with a customer today. We found out that we both like BMWs. There wasn't anything in my statement of work that said, hey, have a conversation with this guy and find out if he likes BMWs. If you allow yourself to play that role of a consultant, play that role of that gap filler, play that role of someone who's here just to make things better, then you're going to have some of that interaction that's going to further your brand. This is called Nerd Journey. It's about career journeys. That phrase, personal brand, should not be new to anybody. If it is, then you probably ought to wind back a few, 200 episodes and start listening to this, because that's what a career journey is all about, is about establishing and enhancing your own personal brand.
And if you do leave places better than where you found them, then your brand is going to go up. Your stock's going to go up.
Exactly. And I think most companies are aware of your personal brand. I chose my words very carefully. Your personal brand might be great. It doesn't always mean that you're going to get the promotion. Okay. That also is not reason for you to give up on enhancing your personal brand. That's just kind of the nature of corporate America in today's world. Your personal brand is yours. You take that with you wherever you go. I think you guys, I can include you guys, have left companies, and there's probably a legacy that you left behind. Was that a good legacy or a bad legacy? That's one of the questions you have to ask yourself when you're trying to refine and enhance your personal brand. If your personal brand isn't important to you, then your career is probably not important to you.
I think that maybe it's that understanding of the connection between the two, right? One of those things is directly influencing the other, and it's an important thing to think about it. And I think maybe some of us, go through our lives to a certain degree with what I'll call a main character syndrome, right?
Yes.
It's the me-centric view of the world. And, some people never stop to think about, how other people are perceiving them or the messages that they're giving off with their actions. And if you want to have a career, you have to think about that, right? That's the message that I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
Understanding the perception that other people have you could be extremely effective. Are you also perceived as being extremely effective? Those are two different things.
Do you have a positive mindset or a negative mindset? Sometimes it's that simple.
And when you mentioned most companies know what your personal brand is, I think I would qualify that and say most of the people you work with should know what your personal brand is, and that's how the company knows what it is. Your boss, your coworkers, the people whose jobs you impact and through your interactions with them.
And maybe I'm putting you guys on the spot. Does your boss know your personal brand? Does your boss know what your ethos, what your foundation is?
That's a very interesting question.
To a large extent, I'd say yes.
I knew your answer would be yes, Nick, because I know both you and your boss. And John, I'm not really trying to put you on the spot, but that's one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, if I am my boss, what is his perception of me? And you got to step outside of your little bubble that says, oh, I'm this or I'm that. And you've got to look at it as fairly and as unbiased as you can to say, what is his perception of me? Let me take the heat off you, John. If you asked me to do that, my boss would probably say, I'm responsive, I am factual, I am always willing. I think those would be the foundation of my personal brand. That's what I mean by your personal brand.
Yeah, I think one of the tasks that we can ask each other to do is to try to articulate what it is that we're trying to put out as our personal brand. What is it that you're trying to put out? And then, ask the second degree question, which is like, are people perceiving you as those things? And if there's a gap, why is there a gap? And again, if there's a gap, what can you do to bridge that gap?
I was really lucky at VMware because they had a program where you could get a coach through BetterUp. And somehow or another, I managed to wind up in that program 3 years in a row. And I actually asked specifically for the same coach the last 2 years. And one of the first things that we would do whenever we got reunited is she would ask me to do a 360-degree evaluation. That's where you send a form, a real form that's, well, now it's a link that you send. But anyway, and you send it up, down, and sideways. That's what it's meant by 360. So my boss would have a chance to comment. People on my team would have a chance to comment. If you were comfortable enough, send it to a customer, they would have a chance to comment. And you get a 360-degree view of really what people think of you. And obviously one of the things is you want them to be honest. And, if there is a perception that is out there that you want to change, that's the best way to identify how people perceive you. And I really wonder if a lot of organizations wouldn't benefit from implementing something like that. I mean, we used to do reviews. I can't remember actually the last time I got an annual review where a boss actually sat down and went through stuff with me. Again, maybe I was supposed to be getting them and didn't, but that type of thing just doesn't seem to be happening. And I think that's where there's a gap in how I want to be perceived and in how you perceive me. Because if we never had that conversation, I don't know what the answer is there.
I don't think it's a conversation we think to have very often. Because as John said, you view yourself at the center of the universe a lot of the times, and you just kind of assume, oh yeah, everybody knows that I'm about X or Y or Z. Do they? Can't assume that.
Yeah, that's why that 360 assessment was always so great, because people would say things in that assessment that maybe they wouldn't necessarily say to your face. It could be anonymous.
Sure.
And each time I went through that, there was a little something that I said, wow, okay, I see where that's coming from. And you can't fix what you don't know is wrong. If you know something's wrong and you don't fix it, that's on you. If you don't know that it's wrong, then maybe that's on someone else that they need to tell you. Now, I've had mentors through my career that didn't hesitate to tell me when I did something wrong. And while that may be perceived as harsh or any other word that we would want to assign to them, the reality is that I was probably better off for that criticism or that correction.
Well, there's ego involved.
Yes.
Anytime you hear feedback that says you're not doing something as well as you should or as well as you thought you were, it hits the ego, and it's really hard to set that aside.
Well, you're asking for somebody to evaluate your work, and it's very difficult for us in our society to distinguish between evaluating our work and evaluating our person, right? So if somebody says you have a gap here and you have a gap here, and if you're doing this, then it's not in my perception that you're doing it. So you need to, inform me better. Whatever that is, it's hard not to hear any of that without hearing, you're not a great person. And it sounds silly to, say it that way, but I think that's sometimes how it hits us emotionally. We're not logic boards, up here in our heads. It's wetware, right?
I agree with everything you said, but that's also how you become better. And I'm going to close my eyes so I'm not looking at either one of you guys, even though this is audio and nobody sees what we're doing. And I'm going to tell you that was probably one of the things that I struggled with earlier in my career, is exactly what you just said, John, was being able to take criticism without getting an attitude about it. And once I got past that and saw that most of the time the criticism I was receiving was not intended to be tearing down criticism, but it was intended to be constructive criticism, then I could take that and use it to make myself better. And again, sometimes you have to look at the source of that criticism also. You have to understand where that person's coming from. There is destructive criticism and there is constructive criticism. I think it's okay to reject the destructive. I think it's a huge issue to reject the constructive, because that's what's going to make you better. I mean, if you think back to some situation in life that was a really hard situation and you worked your way through it, didn't you learn about yourself moving through that situation? Didn't it instill something in you, maybe a sense of resiliency or something like that you could get through this? Well, that's the same thing that constructive criticism is going to provide you. It's going to provide you something that you need to work through that's going to make you better.
Yeah. You have to be receptive to that feedback.
You have to be. And sometimes it's so hard because, like you said, John, we tie those two together, and they don't always deserve to be tied together. I mean, sometimes you got to separate them and really understand that criticism, interpret it, and then take action on it.
As part of my role now as a people manager, we get these engagement surveys. Basically, everybody in the company takes part in them. Some of the questions are about, immediate management. Some of it is about company leadership. You have to have a certain number of people on your team respond in order to get their responses, and they're anonymous. But it's always enlightening to get that kind of anonymous feedback and then take it and then have a plan to get improvement. I know I'm early in my career as a manager, so I was completely comfortable with having, lots of areas to improve. And I think that's another skill, right? Is being a beginner at something.
I think it's so critical that you reach out for that feedback. I think everybody can kind of just sit back and say, yeah, man, I'm doing a great job. My boss likes me. I'm just doing a great job. But until you actually solicit that feedback, that's only your perception.
That's a good point. Let me ask about that, Dale. You talked about the 360-degree feedback request. Maybe you send it out. Somebody's going to return it written or anonymously send it in back to you. If you're not used to doing this, not used to asking people to give you feedback and you have a conversation with them, how should we approach that conversation?
If it was a mentee of mine that I was working with, I would ask them to go and solicit that feedback. And that conversation may be as simple as, hey, there's a few areas that I'm trying to improve on. I would really appreciate if you could just give me some feedback on this, whether that's an email, whether that's a face-to-face, whether that's a water cooler conversation. I think asking for that feedback and telling them, this isn't a right now conversation. Maybe this is a think for a day or two conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's have that conversation. I think that type of transparency and openness can be invaluable.
So be specific. I want feedback on these specific things or this specific thing on how you think I'm doing. And give time for processing. I'm not going to put you on the spot and make you answer right now. Think about it, because I would really like you to be honest. And maybe that, giving someone the time, hey, it's important, blank check exercise, whatever you want to call it, that you just be honest with me so that I can try to improve.
Absolutely. That's the way I've solicited feedback.
That's a great method. Practical advice for someone who maybe hasn't done that much before, who might be listening.
You're going to feel a little vulnerable. There's just no way around it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're kind of opening yourself up. And in every case, it may not work out. There may be somebody with some other agenda that's like, oh man, this is my opportunity. But again, this is where I mentioned a minute ago, you have to evaluate that feedback with a very unbiased view of yourself.
This sparked something in my mind. Is that a process that you had to go through in your title and functional changes? I noticed one of the things that you did was you went from a TAM, a technical account manager, to a technical marketing role. And those functionally are quite different. Maybe it's similar, right? It's like you're talking about a product and solution and maybe even presenting about a product and teaching. But one of those, the tech marketing role, tends to be one-to-many, meaning like one-to-many organizations. So a lot more public speaking, a lot more recording training videos or content introduction or walkthroughs. Was that a process where you needed to go ask for that feedback and get coaching and get improvement, like, set up a mini school for yourself, or was it a little bit more of a natural shift?
It was a little bit of a natural shift, but let me tell you, I got plenty of feedback. And again, just being totally transparent here on your podcast, not all of that feedback felt good when it was coming back. But if you looked at it as unbiased as you could, most of that feedback helped me be better.
Just like you would give someone time to process before they give it to you, you're going to have to give yourself the processing time to go through it.
Yeah, particularly in the tech marketing role where you're speaking a lot, you're making videos, you're producing PowerPoints that, like you said, are going to be seen by many different organizations. And if you throw a video out to a team of 5 or 6 people, including your boss, and say, give me feedback, the team I worked for did not hesitate to give you feedback. You said 5 times during the presentation. This word is misspelled. You should use a green line here instead of a red line. But each and every person's feedback is something that's probably going to make you or your presentation or what it is that you're trying to produce better.
That's so interesting. It's a concrete example of what you were talking about. The things that maybe you care about improving are perfect if you have an audience full of yourself, right?
Yes.
And if as is often the case, we have an audience, it doesn't matter how many people in the organization, of people who are not ourselves, then maybe improving all the different things that different types of people perceive as problems and as standing out will help us to improve overall. Yeah, when the audience is not just you.
John, that's actually a great way of explaining this, because I produced presentations, man. I thought they were like, this is it. I'm going to send this out. People are going to look at it and go, yeah, I got no comment. Done, finished. And man, that thing just come back just riddled with holes. And you're like, are you guys reading the same document I am? But then when you step back from it and you let go of that emotion and you said, oh, well, they are right. I mean, that word is misspelled, and I could have probably used a few less ums or, whatever the case is. Again, it just makes it better. And to your point, it makes it more appealing to people other than you, which was the whole goal anyway.
I think we have plenty of opportunities to generate content where the audience is just ourselves. I'm going to write a knowledge note about this process to myself. And, we can also be honest with ourselves. When you revisit it in 6 months, can you really follow it?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is no, then maybe you need input from other people.
And was it really accurate? That's the other thing. Your understanding of a problem may not necessarily be accurate. Wow. I know that there are some people that just like, that's it. I'm never listening to this podcast again. We are not infallible. Our understanding of a problem may not necessarily be correct.
Always seek to validate that you did understand the problem.
There's that feedback again. You call it validation, it's feedback. If you're just bouncing down the road in your happy little bubble and you're not taking feedback from anybody, because again, it doesn't seem like we do annual reviews where you get heartfelt feedback from management anymore. I don't know why we stopped doing that. I guess it's a time thing, but I actually kind of always enjoyed those because it gave me clear guidance, clear feedback from the person that probably saw more of me than I saw of myself.
The thing I'm taking away from this conversation is positive feedback loops. There's so many different ways that we can get them, from mentorship, from coaching, from peer reviews. All these things are just a way and a method and a tool that it's uncomfortable to engage in and solicit and uncomfortable to listen to, but it is really the only way that we improve, right?
It is.
Yeah. Man, oh man, I just want to thank you so much for your time in engaging with us in this conversation. I think that it was super important to get your viewpoints on mentorship, being a mentor, being a mentee, how to effectively, ask for that feedback, the different types of experiences that you've gone through.
Hey guys, it's been great being here. I really appreciate the invite. Obviously, this is a subject that's kind of near and dear to me. I have a passion for it. Hopefully, there are people out there who will listen to this and will take it to heart, because at the end of the day, your personal brand, your career is all up to you. And if you allow yourself to feel like, well, no, it's kind of up to somebody else because they can always fire me or whatever, then you've already adopted the wrong mindset. I mean, this is yours. You're the one that's driving. Find that mentor that's going to help you establish that set of guardrails, but you're still the one that's driving your own career, and you have to take responsibility for it no matter what point you are in your career. Even if you're laid off, I just was, you have to take responsibility for keeping yourself on track, moving in the direction that you need to move. Anyway, hopefully somebody can take something away from this that will help them do that. That would be great.
And if somebody wants to follow up with you directly, Dale, where can they find you?
LinkedIn's probably one of the best places to find me. Dale McKay. These days, I'm pretty busy out on the road, traveling here and there. Airports are probably another good place to find me these days. So
Amazing. Yeah, your passion on the subject really comes out, Dale. Again, really appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
I really like what John said in that episode about the consultant being a catalyst for change within an organization. And you heard some examples from Dale about how a consultant can be a catalyst for change in a person they work with. Just one person. Could be multiple people. And it's a result of these teachable moments. Moments to teach someone something and leave the situation better. Mentors do this for their mentees, and I actually think you can do this kind of thing in a lot of roles and be a catalyst for change in others. But we really have to be mindful of looking for those opportunities to teach someone or to make them better. Maybe as we go throughout our week, rather than being in a hurry, I have to complete all these tasks, maybe we need to think a little bit more about the people we're working with and the things they might need to get better. Because if I could make the people around me better, then we can work together to produce better quality work, better results, and probably work faster. Sounds a lot like what a technical lead might seek to do. Reminds me of some of the conversations we had with Marnie Coffey on what a technical lead does. I love the discussions about feedback. I think if no one you ask is willing to give you feedback other than you're doing fine, you're doing a great job, you should consider that a red flag. It could mean that the people you're asking don't really feel comfortable being honest with you. Maybe you've not built enough rapport for them to feel comfortable doing it, or they don't feel like they have seen enough of your work to be able to give a good piece of feedback to you. So it may just mean you need to build a better relationship with that person before asking for feedback again. It could also mean that you haven't been specific enough about what you want feedback on. Do you want feedback on your behavior? Do you want feedback on your attitude? Do you want feedback on your work? And if you want feedback on your work, is it the quality of your work? Is it the content of the presentation and the slides you made? Is it the energy level you had while you delivered the presentation? Is it the amount of filler words you used or the way you explained something? You can get really, really specific when you ask people for feedback. And I love the idea of giving people time to process and really emphasizing that the intention is for you to get better. The intention is for them to be honest and help you get better. And hopefully if we lay that groundwork up front and give the person some time to think, that they will be willing to give us feedback. And another red flag, if you keep getting, oh, you're doing fine, you're doing a good job, you might need to ask some different people. Maybe you've been asking the same few people all the time, and you need to ask some folks that work in a different group or who work with you in a different way or have a different level of expertise, and see if that gets you some better feedback. But again, make sure you're specific. Make sure you communicate the intent of this exercise. It is for you to get better. Because it would be so much better to receive some constructive criticism now than a year from now, 6 months from now. The sooner we get it, the sooner we can know a little bit more about where the gaps are so that we can improve. I could tell you an interesting story. I was in college. I got into a specific mathematics course, numerical analysis, and I had been told that I was great at math by all my professors getting to this point. I was very good at it, doing great. And then I got to this course and the professor told me very kindly that I had some gaps. I really had some foundational knowledge gaps that I needed to fill. And the only way to do that is to go back and fill them. And I have to tell you, it was really hard to take at the time because no one else had given me that specific feedback. And because it was a different kind of feedback, a lot of people thought that it wasn't valuable or that this person was just being a jerk. But in fact, that was probably some of the best feedback I've ever received in my entire life. And it makes me so appreciative that that professor was willing to do that. Be honest, give me the feedback on the gaps that I had. I don't recall if I asked for it. I think I just went in there to his office with a concern saying, I'm afraid that I'm not going to do well in your class because I can't seem to understand the material. And that's when I got the feedback. So I guess in a way I did ask for it. I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Dale. Really appreciate him being on the show. If you did enjoy it, please rate us 5 stars and consider writing a review. Share this episode with a friend and mention why it caught your eye. What made you press play? We'll see you next week.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.